Hello, friends, and thanks for listening to the Capital City Soccer Show, your independent source for everything Austin FC. Today, we're going to talk about the Columbus Crew, and we're going to be joined by Chris Bils, who's a local soccer writer and soccer expert, and an expert on this saga. He covered the entire thing from start to finish, essentially. So we're going to bring him in and kind of go through that whole story. So I'm joined, as always, by Mr. Jeremiah Bentley. Jeremiah, how's it going?
Hey, Landon, I'm doing great. Everybody, this is Jeremiah Bentley. And I think one thing we'll get into in this interview is Chris has a perspective that probably, nobody else has around this, just because of his background, because of where he's from, where he worked, and how we got to Austin. So we're excited to share this journey with everyone, and hopefully you all enjoy the show.
Yeah, so this interview, we've already recorded it. It goes a little bit long, so we're not going to waste any more of your time. We're just going to jump right in. So we'll take a quick break, and we'll be back with Chris Bils. We wanted to take a minute to remind you to rate, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
And we'd also like to encourage you to visit CapitalCitySoccer.com, where Troy Bryant and Zach Mason bring you the latest in Austin FC news, including player rumors, sponsorship updates, ticket updates, and more. Once again, that is CapitalCitySoccer.com.
Today we're joined by Chris Bils, a soccer writer for the Austin American-Statesman, alongside other publications. Chris is one of the lead reporters through the entire Austin-Columbus drama, and so he'll have a unique perspective on this whole situation, both being a Columbus native and a Crew intern before coming to Austin. So we're really excited to talk to Chris, and we're happy to have you here, Chris. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. I really enjoy the podcast. You guys are killing it with this thing, so happy to come on and talk about a topic that you guys are really just jumping in the fire here. It's gonna be Twitter's gonna be fun for a couple of days. So
with some of the last few shows we've done, we're taking the Mr. Rogers approach, which is, if it's mentionable, it's manageable. And so We're going to talk about the supporters group split, and I think that went well and was kind of cathartic in a way. And I'm hoping this will be the same thing. So it's like a thing that we didn't ever really get a chance to speak openly and honestly about for a multitude of reasons. And so now that some time has separated us from all of the drama, I think it's a good time to do it.
Yeah, no, I agree. I'm not sure everybody will agree, but that's all right. Like you said, I like the Mr. Rogers approach. I agree with you on that.
So before we jump into that, we wanted to take the opportunity while we have you here to talk a little bit about Cecilio Dominguez. We figured you might know a little bit more than what we do. So can you briefly tell us what the state of that transfer rumor is?
Yeah, so it sounds like it's been interesting the last few days. I'm sure you guys have been following Twitter and using the translate function as much as I have, or maybe not so much. I know, Landon, you speak maybe a little more Spanish than I do, but definitely given the Spanish a workout this week, which is good. I like stretching those muscles a little bit. But yeah, the latest news out of Argentina sounds like there's some outlets reporting that it's basically a done deal for Cecilio Dominguez to come to Austin FC. There's a lot of reasons why I think it makes sense as you kind of put the puzzle pieces together. Independiente is in dire straits financially right now, with owing some clubs some money, including Club America, where Cecilio Dominguez came from. I think the reported sum that I saw was that they owe $3.8 million to Club America, and the latest report that I saw had Dominguez coming to Austin FC for about $4 million. So it'll help them kind of pay off those debts. And there's a few players that they're maybe looking to move in this transfer window. So just kind of an interesting little peek into the window of South American football a little bit this past week, which is, kind of fun. And also, I'm sure you guys saw as well, Cecilio Dominguez has the same agent, Diego Cerati,
right? Yeah.
Same agent as Rodney Redes. So it kind of, that's an extra puzzle piece that kind of fits and makes you think that, okay, this seems like it's probably headed in the right direction. I've actually been able to message Cerati a couple times over the last week, and just this morning he said that yeah, we're still talking, so still, and actually he said Sunday's not a day for working for a lot of people down there, so I think it's not that I wasn't expecting anything to happen today, because these things move quickly, and the news gets around pretty quickly if there's something going down. So I don't doubt the reporting out of Argentina, but I suspect we might learn a little more as this week gets started. So maybe by the time this podcast hits, information than we do right now.
Yeah. So for the record, we are recording this on a Sunday night, and it'll probably come out Tuesday morning. So by the time you all are listening to this, he might be an Austin FC player officially. So we'll see. Speaking of Austin FC signings, just real quick, have you gotten a chance to watch any of Redis's games or highlights or anything like that?
I haven't watched any games. It sounds like you've been maybe a little bit more on the grind with that than I have. I don't have one of those fancy passwords.
Yeah, I've watched I think they've played 5 maybe since the restart, and I think I've watched 3 of them. And yeah, he works super hard. Like he's young, he's clearly gifted in several different ways. So it's frustrating to watch because Guarani don't really keep the ball. Like they don't have very good possession in the attacking third. And so it's just like kind of desperate moments of like midfielders launching super long balls for Rodney to chase, or like him checking in and being able to kind of hold up play or make a connecting pass. But it's a little bit frustrating to watch when you're just watching this one player and hoping for him to do something. But he's showing a lot of promise. So I think I don't look at him and say like he's definitely going to be like a world beater in MLS, but I watch him and think that he could be a very good player in MLS given the some development, which Wolf has talked about. We got this player to develop and make a better player. And also just in a system that suits him. So hopefully that's going to be the scenario for him when he gets to Austin.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of the exciting thing there. Should maybe be seen as an exciting thing with Dominguez, is that you're looking at a player who's a few years older, a little bit different spot in his career, but similar position, similar background, being from Paraguay and Asuncion specifically. And I just think it's interesting, right, seeing the profiles of those two players and thinking about, okay, where do they fit into the roster? I think Redis with the price point, and I do think he's probably going to be a factor that first year, especially if he comes in and does well in training. But definitely Dominguez is a starting 11 level player, and potentially even a DP with that transfer sum if that is accurate, and that ends up, it depends how long the contract is. We can get into the whole TAM versus DP.
Yeah.
If you guys, but that's not this podcast right now. So
Jeremiah loves TAM and GAM.
Yeah. Oh yeah. TAM and GAM. That's all I do is share memes on Twitter with Landon about it. Yeah.
There you go. Yeah. So I don't know. It's too early to say whether Dominguez, we don't even know if he's, fully going to be on the team yet, but assuming that he is, I just think that's kind of a next level. I don't know that it'll really whet the appetite for some fans of getting a big name DP, but I do think that's kind of maybe the profile you're looking for of, okay, that's sort of a big transfer fee, but he's 25 and potentially you get a sell on at some point. So it's just kind of interesting to see the steps of, okay, they got the first player and now here's the second player and kind of the building blocks kind of deal. So, which I know you guys have been into, thinking about that stuff too.
Oh yeah. Think too much about it for there not actually even being any other players besides Rodney right now. But
yeah.
All right, let's jump into the reason why we're here, which is to talk about the Austin Columbus Crew saga. So let's jump in from kind of the beginning of this, which would have been the summer of 2013 when Anthony Precourt bought the Columbus Crew. And tell me if I'm wrong about this, Chris, but I believe he was the second to last. The Hunts were the second to last owners to own multiple teams.
Yeah, that sounds right. I honestly maybe would have thought that they were the last. Who was the last?
Um, I think Anschutz still owned one other team, and I can't remember. Maybe Houston.
Oh,
Did
he
Anschutz
still
own
hosted.
Houston?
He still, yeah, he did at some point. So maybe.
I think it was still a few years when he was the majority owner at Houston after Precourt bought the Crew. But yeah, so it's essentially MLS moving out of that period where they want each club to be owned by one owner, and that this was one of the reasons this happened was for that. So 2013, Anthony Precourt. Well, to go back a little bit further, they were trying to find local ownership in Columbus and weren't able to do it. And so that's when they started looking outside of Columbus. And Anthony Precourt was one of the people that came up. So tell me if I'm wrong about this, but you were an intern at the Columbus Crew. Was it during this very moment?
No, it's interesting. It's funny you wanted to bring this up because this, I see this conversation. I'm going to peel back the curtain a little bit, but so peeling back the curtain, I remember where I was when Anthony Precourt, when it was announced that Anthony Precourt had bought the team. I was actually so it was summer. It was I think it was July. Was it?
Yeah, I think it was announced official August 1st, but
okay, so
looking
August
at some
1st,
news stories, it would have been.
That sounds right.
There was talk about it for a week or so before that.
Okay, so yeah, around that time frame, late August or late July, early August, I was actually on vacation with my mom in Chicago. It was like the summer leading into my senior year of college. I went to a small school called Ashland, which is actually in between Columbus and Cleveland. Anyway, my mom and I were in Chicago, kind of enjoying a weekend, and I remember opening up Twitter and seeing all this stuff about Anthony Precourt and seeing kind of Crew fans. And actually, the thing that people were wondering that day was exactly what we're talking about, is whether Precourt was going to maybe try and move the team, because people were trying to figure out who this guy was. A lot of people, there had been some talk of maybe a few years previously about potentially local ownership, and this was not that. It was a venture capitalist from California, and there really wasn't a lot of public information on Anthony Precourt. I mean, there still really isn't a ton other than the his MLS ownership. So it was interesting and it's interesting thinking back just how different my life was then, as I was just a college kid and really interested in soccer and starting to get more into MLS, to the point where I actually called up either Tim Miller or Alex Caulfield, who were in the communications department that summer. And this is what I can't remember if it was just before or just after that conversation had happened. I was on the way back from my writing for the drag racing magazine in Norwalk, Ohio, and one day, and I had gone to a networking event, and I called one of those guys and was like, hey, I really want to work in soccer, and it was right after Ashland cut their men's soccer team, and that was kind of my baby when I was in college, was covering the men's soccer team in the fall, and the men's and women's teams. But I took that news pretty hard, and I just wanted to find a way to get more involved in soccer that fall, and they brought me in. It was August, so yeah, right, just a couple months or even less than a month, it sounds like, after Anthony Precourt had bought the team. So I was there seeing the very early stages of the new ownership, and really the front office trying to feel out what that was going to be like. So yeah, not to get too long-winded on the very first part of this, but it's funny to think back to that time in my life, because I remember exactly where I was and what I was doing when Anthony Precourt bought the Columbus Crew.
So what was you just said that there was people were a little bit nervous about it within, I mean, like just before then, and then within, say, like that first year afterwards, what was the atmosphere and the mood like around the Crew, and how did it change during that time?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it was interesting to watch from inside the front office, because this is the thing that I think people don't understand, and I want to be careful the way I say this, because I'm really not trying to lead anybody astray. I grew up 2 hours from Columbus, so it's not like I was really embedded in the fan base. Like, MLS was a thing that I kind of caught onto probably leading out of the 2010 World Cup, and had gone to maybe like one or two crew matches that summer, and then kind of went to a few more during college. Found a few friends that wanted to go down, and so it's not like I was like in the Nordeca every weekend or anything like that. But then I got the internship, and seeing it from the inside, I think people were just really energized. I mean, like the Huns did so much for Major League Soccer, but by that point, their focus was on Dallas. And I don't think that the Hunts had been to Columbus maybe more than a few times in the past few years leading up to that moment. And the fan base was at an all-time low, especially in 2012, I think was their lowest attendance. And
they had a few middling seasons as well. They had success in a few years before, and there's I think 3 years where the team wasn't that great either.
During my internship, there were 3 different head coaches because Robert Warzija got fired. I mean, like literally maybe the week that I started on the internship, and Brian Bliss, who now. What is Brian? I think Brian Bliss is with maybe the U23s or one of anyway, Brian Bliss was the interim coach, and then they hired Greg Berhalter, and I was there. I was on the conference call. I transcribed like a 45-minute conference call when Greg Berhalter got hired at the Columbus Crew, and I was there the day he started the job, and had a fun interaction with him the day that he started. Just really kind of got a glimpse into his personality a little bit. But so anyway, there were 3 different head coaches. And Andy Loughnane, I don't think was hired until a little bit later, maybe even 2015. Or it was definitely not. It was maybe 2014 or 2015.
It was several months into. I looked this up the other day. It wasn't immediately, but it wasn't long after he bought the team.
So maybe I'm off on that.
I want to say within 6 months or so. Okay.
My internship ended in November, December. So anyway, I could be just a little bit off on that. But the where was I going there? What was the initial question?
What was the mood, or what was the mood around the club and the front office?
Yeah, I think
reacting to that.
Yeah, everybody was really energized. I think because there was new ownership, and of course everybody I'm sure it's like any business. Like the Statesman went through this a couple of years ago, where there was new owners and everyone's trying to be on their best behavior and do their jobs the best that they can, and new ownership's got new expectations, and there was a little bit more money being pumped into the club. Like when they hired Greg Berhalter, everybody was like, oh, wow, like here's a former national team player and a guy who coached in Europe. And so there was just kind of this feeling that, and I think were already starting on the rebrand. I wasn't part of any of those conversations, but they ended up rebranding. And that was a big moment for the club. And within the fan base, even, I think there was still some feeling out period, but I think there was a lot of energy around this is the new Crew. And that was the term that was, I think Frank Hick was out on the street before they rebranded. Frankie's just the coolest dude, but he was out, pumping up #new Crew. And that was the feeling around Columbus, was that this was a whole new ball game with the Crew. It was going to be more Major League. And so that's what I remember, is just the energy.
Yeah, so there was obviously one, part of that acquisition that would lead to all the drama later, the infamous Austin clause.
Yeah.
But when did it pop up? Like, was that something that was even a thing that anybody, knew about, or what is the origin of that? Because that would obviously be a big part of the story down the road.
The first time I ever heard about the possibility of the Columbus Crew moving to Austin was I was sitting in Haymaker after I'd moved here in 2016, but I think it was actually the summer of 2017. I went to a U.S. national team watch party at Haymaker, and Josh Babetsky was sitting across the table from me, and he said something about, what would you think about the Columbus Crew moving to Austin? And something along those lines. And I remember looking him dead in the face, and I just said, that's not going to happen. I said, there's no way that's going to happen. Like, MLS won't let that happen. And he was like, well, I'm pretty sure that's gonna happen at some point. And I was like, I remember him being very sure and me being very sure and just being like, all right, like we'll see. And then I think you want to get to it later, but the Grant Wall tweet was really when everything kind of popped off, and that was, you know, the first I thought about it after that, and I was like, wow, okay, this is real. So it's just kind of interesting to think back to that conversation with Josh, and we've talked about it since then. I've talked about it to a few people about it, but I don't think I've been real public about a lot of the reasons why I didn't think was going to happen is why it didn't end up happening, right? But that doesn't mean that, you know, Josh wasn't right or didn't know some things back then that I didn't know. But I do feel like it's just interesting to think back, because the exact reasons, like the history and the fan base, and knowing right how upset original MLS fans get about the history being ignored or neglected, and the fact that there's so many owners willing to buy into these teams, no matter what city they're in, seemingly. It's just, that's kind of what it ended up happening. It could have very easily gone the other way, and we can get to that stuff too, but all the reasons why I was like, no, that's not going to happen. That's exactly what ended up being so ugly. And like, me seeing both sides, I was so frustrated at certain points with just the conversation around it. And you guys are well versed in all that, like the Twitter conversations, but also some of the political back and forth and all the different layers that we went through. It was really a long couple of years of my life that I was deeply entrenched, probably more than I should have been in a lot of the moments that transpired. But yeah, where do you want to go next, Landon?
I wanted to touch on that, on the Austin clause a bit more. So for those of you who aren't as obsessed, or not necessarily obsessed, weren't as like inundated with all this information as we were over the last few years, there was a clause, like when Anthony Precourt bought the team, or at some point in those years when he owned the Crew, there was a clause put into the contract with MLS that said he can't move the team unless it's to Austin. And so I wanted to ask you if you had heard anything about that before, but I think you just said you hadn't. So it's unclear when that was added, if it was like off the bat or if it was added at some point later on. But from all the stuff that I've read and heard, I get this sense that it wasn't in, like, maybe partly this, but it wasn't entirely Anthony Precourt coming in saying, I'm definitely going to move this team to Austin.
Well, there was even a period in the initial reporting phase of this when, I would say most of late 2017, when we were still trying to understand if that was real, whether the Austin clause was real, because the night of Grant Wall's tweet, there was a story that went online on the Columbus Dispatch website, written by I think Adam Jardy, who was the beat writer when I was the intern down there, and he was the beat writer until I want to say either 2015 or 2016, and he moved to Ohio State men's basketball beat. But he posted a story that mentioned the Austin clause, and then Michael Arrace would sort of point to it in some of his columns, but not really directly source it. And it was really interesting, and not that it was bad reporting by any stretch. I just think that piece, that initial story that went online on the Dispatch, was taken down by the morning, and I didn't save it, and there was a point during that, and this is how I remember it. So, I'm not trying to throw shade at anybody at the Dispatch. These things, that was a crazy day for a number of different people, especially, certain people in Austin and from Austin who were actually in Columbus that night. I think you guys maybe talked about that on one of the previous episodes, but
You're referencing Kristen Markham there.
Yeah. I was making sure. I wanted to make sure in my head that was public. Yeah. So
Yeah, we did.
Yeah. So yeah, Kristen was in Columbus, and there were a lot of people very upset about the way that story came to light ahead of schedule. Like it was an embargoed story that leaked, which is always frustrating for people in PR and even in journalism, right? I mean, we don't want that to happen either, but it happens sometimes because with a story like that, with so much dynamite and just somebody lit the fuse and it got out and it happened. And there was stuff that was flying that night like crazy. And I'm not sure how much editing went into it and how well sourced some of the little details were. And that was one that I just didn't know for 5 or 6 months what the truth was around the Austin clause. And eventually we kind of dragged it out of somebody at some point that
I think Garber confirmed it at one point.
Yeah, exactly. That's what happened. I think it was Alexi Lawless. Alexi Lawless at MLS Cup in December asked a question about the Austin clause, and Garber just answered the question. And I was sitting at my computer like, what? Like he just confirmed that the Austin clause exists during the middle of like the pre MLS Cup. And this is I'm the only person in the world probably who's like nerding out over, not the only person, but like, I was immediately like tweeting about like Don Garber just confirmed the Austin clause in the middle of this press conference. And I'm not sure anybody really cared as much as I did at that moment, but yeah, it was real. Like it was real. There was a clause at some point that allowed Anthony Precourt to have that option, and the reasons why we can get into, but I mean, that was the only way that the crew was going to be sold at the price that it was sold for.
Do you get the sense that, like, from what I've read and heard, I get the sense that it almost seemed like that was as much to do with MLS as it was to do with Anthony Precourt. Would you agree with that, or would you do you think it was?
I mean, that's for the people in Columbus to decide, right? Like, there's a lot of vitriol that is aimed at both sides, and there's parts of it that certainly are warranted and fair, but there's also parts that maybe, like if it wasn't Anthony Precourt, wouldn't it have been somebody else? Like they might have moved the team back in 2013 if they had found a different owner that was willing to pay the price to move it at that moment. But they found an owner who at that point, I mean, pumped some money, and I'm not going to say a lot. I'm not going to say a little. I'm not going to make any judgments on that end of things, but they were spending at a higher rate than the Hunts were on the Columbus Crew, and they rebranded, and they had a whole shindig at City Hall with the mayor and some people and some ugly jerseys that sure looked like they were trying to get something pushed through it with the city. To me, that's what I thought was happening at that moment in franchise history, was that they were trying to get it, maybe some start to plant the seeds for a stadium deal in Columbus. And it just didn't happen. And at some point they decided to act on the Austin clause. Now, I think there's a lot of proof that they were acting on it years previously. The partnership with the Austin Aztecs is one that gets pointed to a lot in 2015. But, to say that Anthony Precourt did nothing for the Columbus Crew, I think it's just not true. It's just not. And there's a lot of people that are in Columbus that will probably be upset with me for saying that. But I think that MLS made the decision that they felt like they had to make at the moment that they did, to sell a team that was bleeding money and not productive in its current owner's hands. And they found an owner that was willing to pay a price that they were willing to take. And they got to MLS Cup in 2015, and then the ball bounced off Steve Clark's leg, and everything kind of spiraled from there. It's so crazy to look back on it, and there's probably some people that aren't ready to have that conversation, but here we are. And it's just, it's so wild, and it's especially wild for me sitting here in Austin reporting on Austin FC that, you know, that's a whole different layer to things that is just, I just can't believe it. But there's so many moments that are, you wouldn't, I wouldn't, there's no way in a million years I would have believed the way this story turned out if somebody had set me down.
That's part of the reason why, like, we wanted to do this show. And it's like the Save the Crew story was like the headline in MLS, right? Like around this whole thing, like the Save the Crew movement was the headline, and that's all most people knew about. And like, fair enough, it's like a special story, right? But there's just like so many more layers below that of like of the whole thing in general, but then also like of just the stuff that was happening here in Austin, like the peripheral stuff with like City Hall and all of that. But we'll get to that here in a little bit. But yeah, it's a wild story, and if unless you were like kind of following along, it's like very complex, and so it's difficult to understand. But once you start like grabbing onto little pieces and realize how crazy it is, it's a very like crazy and complex situation. But we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves. We're trying to stay somewhat chronological here. So going back to the Grant Wall tweet, again, so that was kind of out of nowhere, right? Was it the same? That was the first thing that anybody knew about it, or were there any whispers earlier that day or anything about it?
So yeah, that's an interesting question because I wrote this down, so I want to make sure I got my facts the way that so it was October 16th of 2017, and I think that was, in my memory, it was a Monday. It was either Monday or Tuesday, and it was F1 week in Austin, and it was my first time covering Formula One. And Kevin Lytle was showing me the ropes and showing me around COTA, and it was a long day. And I had just gotten home, and I got a call from Kevin, and I was like, Kevin, we went over all this stuff. Like, I just want to sit by I just want to relax. And he's like, do you have any contacts left at the Columbus Crew? Like, is there anybody that I can call? Because I'm hearing these rumors and I don't know what's real and what's not real, but somebody is trying to tell me that the Columbus Crew might move to Austin, and there's going to be an announcement tomorrow. And I'm just, in my head, I'm just like, what the heck is, I just, like, that conversation with Josh Babetsky popped in my mind, and I was just like, what in the world is happening right now? And yeah, I called up some people, and nobody was sure of what was the facts at that point, but they were like, yeah, you might be onto something. And then obviously there was folks that Grant Wall beat us to confirming that at that moment. Kevin was in the lead of reporting that, and I actually didn't start reporting on any of it until late October, which I can get into if you're interested in that minutia. But it was an interesting couple of weeks for sure. Of first, I had an F1 race to cover, and I think if I remember right, Anthony Precourt came to town during that week, later in the week, and met with Kevin Lytle and some other media members in town, and then we had the race to cover that weekend. And it was a lot of fun covering F1, but that was also the soccer part of me was just going insane trying to keep up with what was happening with this potential MLS team in Austin, and this MLS team that I also had some ties to back home. So yeah.
Yeah, that tweet. That tweet was like a 10 o'clock at night tweet. I remember, like, I don't think I slept that night because, like, everybody that knew anything, was excited about soccer and whatever, was just, all over it. Because I think you're right. I mean, there was something cooking that got out a few hours earlier than anybody had planned.
Yeah, and then, like, once it was out, that's exactly right, Jeremiah. Is like, I don't think I slept either because Twitter was just on fire. It was like, and I told somebody this very shortly after, is like, I had created the perfect curated Twitter feed at that moment. on October 16th, 2017, like my Twitter feed was literally, it was people in Columbus soccer and it was people in Austin soccer. And that's what was on my feed. It was like I had created the people create those lists on Twitter. Like that was my followers, or not my followers, but the people I was following on Twitter was like, I was like, what is happening? What in the world is my life right now?
I went back and read a lot of like reactions to the Grant Wall tweet and stuff that was happening around that time. And it's just like, I mean, now when I go to it, certain people's names pop up to the top because it's people I follow now. And like at the time, it's people I wouldn't have met for like a year from that point. And now it's just like going back and reading all these things, and it's really bizarre. Like you were talking about looking back at like your life in when you heard that Precourt bought the Crew back when you're still in college, and it feels like that to me, like thinking back to just how different of a world like our individual lives, but then just like Austin soccer was at that point in time, and like what it's how much it's changed since. But yeah, so kind of the next phase after the Grant Wall tweet, like so the Save the Crew movement starts up, and that's really like that's the story for the next few months. And then that kind of kickstarts the legal end of it in Columbus, and then at the same time, like a bunch of legal stuff going on and like stuff going on at City Hall here in Austin, kind of these two separate legal paths happening in Columbus and Austin that this whole deal is kind of hinging on. And so that's where kind of the Austin side of the saga starts as well. So are there any like kind of highlights from that era that you want to talk about?
Yeah, there's something that I feel like I should go back just a little bit to right after the Grant Wall tweet, which is like, I actually went to Columbus. That was my first assignment covering this whole saga, which was, I don't know if you guys remember, but the Crew was in the playoffs, and they had a match against NYCFC. It was on Halloween. I think it was actually on Halloween. And I had sort of grappled with, and this is the reason that I wanted to bring this up, is that for the first like week and a half, I was just watching this story unfold, and Kevin would, ask me things about, do you know this about Columbus Crew? You know, who's the person to talk to for this? And just certain things. And I didn't know whether I should really dive into it, right? Like there's that whole issue of conflict of interest, and I didn't really know what my interests were in the whole thing. And then I was really kind of thinking about it at some point, and there's like that curated Twitter feed comment that I made is like, well, for me, it'd be really awesome if there was an MLS team in Austin. Like, one of the things that was missing when I moved here. I moved here without a job in 2016, and kind of, it's not that I had given up on the stream of covering soccer, but I was like, I don't know, like I don't know if there's going to be soccer in this city. Like there might be at some point, and this was like the moment that it was maybe going to happen. And of course, I wanted to report on it. And then also, I had all these contacts and connections and just little things that I knew about the Columbus Crew, that who else in Austin knew that stuff. And it was like, I made a pact with myself very early on that honestly, like, I kind of, at times, maybe during the process, certainly I wished I didn't like throw myself this deep into it. But like, I was like, if I'm going to do this, the reason that I'm doing it is to, like, if this is going to go down, if this is going to happen, and this is going to be the MLS team that's going to come to Austin, like, people need to know how it happened. And people need to know exactly what happened and who was the players and what, what led to it happening. And I didn't know what was happening. And of course I wanted to find out, just as a soccer interested person. living in Austin, Texas from Ohio. Like I talked to people that week, the week after the tweet went out, or 2 weeks after, was Ohio State, Penn State. And I'm an Ohio State football fan, and I went down to the bar that people watch games at, and I was talking to like this young group of friends that, like, it was somebody like me that had moved from Ohio down there, and then their friend that was visiting on the weekend, and they were just like, man, this is so crazy. Do you think this MLS team is going to come? Like, do you think the Columbus Crew is going to move here? Like, what is happening with this? And I was like, man, I don't really know what's happening. And I was like, I need to figure it out. And I was like, well, if I feel that way, there's got to be other people that want to know how this is going to happen. And I think that's the whole thing, is that maybe I could have been more transparent, but at the same time, it was hard to get people to trust me. And I think that sitting here today, and you guys can have your own opinions, and somebody in Columbus can have their own opinions on how I went about it. I'm happy with the way things turned out. Of course, like, I'm a soccer person from Ohio who lives in Austin. Like, I wasn't unbiased. Like, I can say that right now, that I wasn't unbiased, but I wasn't biased one way or the other. I wanted soccer to thrive in two cities that I knew soccer could thrive in. And the jury's still out on both, but I think they're both in a much better position than they were before. And in some small way, like, I like to think that the things that I was doing, and the things that Andrew Erickson was doing, and the things that other reporters like were doing to kind of uncover the truth of what was happening, and peeking under rocks that people didn't want us to peek under, and, making requests for documents that people didn't want us to request. Like, it all happened. And I think that's the one thing that I kind of wanted to just come on here and say, is like, yeah, like, I threw myself in that fire, and like, I'll take whatever comes out of it. But what came out of it at this point, as we're sitting and talking in 2020, is like, it's pretty incredible, isn't it? Like, to think back on all those moments, and all of the times that people tried to gaslight me and tell me that I was biased, and that I was a Columbus Crew fan, and that I was a pre-court apologist, and that I was just an idiot. Like, that stuff hurt, and it sucked.
Yeah.
I went through like a dark period, and I like, maybe that's maybe a bridge too far. And like, but it just, it all happened. And like, I'm happy that I guess I went through it. I don't know.
And I think, so I've heard, I think reporters, like journalists, people who work in news, will say, like, if there's a story that has two sides, if you can come out of it with both sides of it, like people from both sides of it thinking that you were leaning one way or the other, then you probably did your job right.
Yeah, I mean, I tried to tell myself that, but it didn't always work,
Yeah. I can't imagine, like, I just, like, Jeremiah and I, and like a lot of people we know here in town, just like the stuff that was happening on Twitter that wasn't even necessarily aimed at me as a person, or like my work, or like what I was doing. Like, it got very emotional just from that aspect of it. So I can't imagine how much more intense it was for you, like being kind of right at the heart of all of it. So yeah, I don't envy that position.
Yeah, but I mean, it's all fine. We like the Mr. Rogers thing. Like, if it's, what was it?
If it's mentionable, it's manageable.
Yeah, like, it's like, I don't know. Yeah, Mr. Rogers maybe helped me through a little bit, but who knows? Maybe somebody else talking like him. Who knows? But it's wild to think back on all those moments. But here we are in 2020, and we got a pandemic to get through. But soccer is going to start on time in Austin, and there's a new stadium on the way in Columbus. And, like, everybody's in a better spot than they were in October 16th, 2016 or 2017. And that's what I think makes me feel kind of good about the whole thing.
So we can say now that we're sure Austin is going to have a Major League Soccer team, but there were long stretches because of things happening in Ohio and things happening here in Austin where that was not necessarily the case. And that's another thing we wanted to ask you about is during, again, for people who weren't following this super closely, there was the lawsuit in Ohio that could have potentially kept the team from moving. But then here in Austin, they needed to get a place to build a stadium. Like MLS wasn't going to give Austin a team if there was not a good site to build a stadium on. And so there's this huge city council saga that happened here trying to get a site approved for this. And so what Jeremiah and I talked a little bit about before we started recording and what we wanted to ask you is, were there times along this journey, like just in Austin, where you felt like this wasn't going to happen? And then was there a moment that changed and you were pretty sure it was going to?
Yeah, there were plenty on the first question. There were plenty of moments when I can remember just moments in the newsroom where Kevin Lytle and I would be just talking through different moments throughout the process. And like you said, like it was like a percentage, like Kevin loves doing percentages on like, what's the percentage you think it'll happen? And I can't remember the lowest or highest that I ever got, but there were definitely moments when it was well below 50% that this was gonna go through. And even to the point where I think for the first probably 3 or 4 months until there were, maybe even after there were stadium locations, that was like December, I think, when there were like the city was pointing out different spots on the map.
I think that sounds right. Yeah.
I ended up doing like a tour of them and I went around to all the different possibilities, but basically people thought Kevin and I were crazy for chasing this story as hard as we were. They thought the Statesman was a little bit chasing a red herring and that Austin was a pawn in this greater scheme for Columbus to get a new stadium, or for Precourt to get his team a new, because, and I think the larger feeling around this is that like there's a lot of old Austin that feels like Austin's still not quite the right place, or not quite big enough and not quite a major league, and they just felt like they were a pawn in this larger scheme that MLS was running to get money out of other people's pockets. And I think there were definitely publications in Austin that felt like the Statesman was putting too much effort and too much time into reporting on it. And
interesting.
But like we knew, like, right, we were talking to people in both Columbus and Austin that knew that this was like a real possibility. Like the way that people were acting, the way that the ownership in Columbus was acting was not the way you would act if you were trying to get a deal done in Columbus in certain moments. So like, yeah, I don't know. It's interesting to think back, but yeah, there were certainly moments when we didn't think it. And as far as the moment when I really did think that the stadium deal specifically, I can remember just the moment when, and it's really, really like city council, like Jeremiah will appreciate this, but the moment that I knew that the stadium deal was gonna have a chance was when you remember item 60. Do you remember?
Oh yeah, the first 7-4 vote, right? Basically.
Yeah, exactly. So like there was this item 60 that was on the city council agenda for June 28th, 2018, that infamous day when we were all there until 4 a.m. And I went outside City Hall when Anthony Precourt was walking into the building, and I just said, hey, if this item 60 passes, it doesn't look good for you guys. What do you think? Something along those lines of like, what happens if item 60 passes, or like, do you think it's going to pass? And he said, it's not optimal for us. I actually found this quote today. It's not optimal for us. It might slow things up a bit, but as long as item 64 passes, which ended up actually being item 130, which is what kept us there so late. But that's what we're hoping for. He said, we're confident. Before that, item 60 was being talked about as this poison pill that was going to kill the whole thing. And we can get into the minutia of it, but basically
just briefly, what was item 60?
Yeah. So it was when, so there was that group, and I don't want to get the names wrong, but there was that group that wanted to build a mixed use development on the land, and
Capella, I think.
Yeah, Capella, and they wanted an RFP process, which would be the normal. There's like debates over whether that would have been the normal process for a tract like this to go through, and so. Basically, they wanted an RFP process to be implemented into what was going to happen out there, which would have dragged the process on for probably like another year, and it would have made the stadium, like, things needed to happen quicker than that. And
so what was that later item that
so what happened was there was not enough support on the city council for that RFP process, but it was negotiated in a way. There were some things that were changed, and it wasn't necessarily publicly known going to the dais that night that the item 60 had been changed significantly to the point where it was no longer a poison pill. But when I talked to Precourt, he clearly knew that. And when I sensed the body language from Richard Suttle and everybody in the Precourt camp, they clearly knew that something had been changed, that item 60 was no longer a threat, and this RFP process was no longer going to happen. And I remember talking to Mayor Adler at 4 a.m. That morning, the next morning, right after things had finished up. And here's a quote from him. He said, "The change from not asking for an RFP process to just saying receive offers, it was the memo from the manager saying, quote, this is how I interpret item 60. At that point, this deal will make or not make based on the negotiations now between the team and the city." And this is the part that I thought was super important. I think I bolded it at the time in my notes, but if they can negotiate a good deal, then soccer will happen here. And that's the mayor at 4 a.m. on June 29th. And I had not slept in a long time, and I don't really know if I registered at the moment how important that was, but I do remember the next morning feeling like, okay, yeah, this is going to happen. I think, like, I think this was way over 50%. It's going to happen. And, those are the kinds of things that, being deep in this process, like, I don't know that you would think that it was this change in language from RFP process to receive offers is what did it, but it's kind of how the whole thing worked. It was very political and very, I learned a lot about politics over those few months, but to me, that was the moment, that was the moment. Talking to the mayor at 4 a.m.
Yeah. I think the moment for like soccer fans here in town was a few months later in August, when the city council voted on the term sheet for the stadium lease at McCalla Place. That was the time for me when I was like, okay, this is almost definitely going to happen at this point. And then it was not much longer after that. It looks like a week after was when the team name and the branding and everything was announced. And so the actions from Precourt Sports Ventures at the time made all of us think that, like, they believe this is going to happen. And so we all kind of believed it was going to happen.
And believe me, there were still some people that were nervous after that moment on June 29th. Like, there was that vote and nobody knew exactly which votes for which. And there was a lot of there was, I think Kathy Tovo was asking for some things at the last minute, and Jeremiah probably remembers some of the maneuverings maybe as well as I do, but I'm trying to think who was
they made a lot of changes. Yeah. Remember Kassar got the affordable housing thing, which I think sort of eventually settled him on it. I like to think that my testimony at 3:12 in the morning that night, that magical 60 seconds that I had when everybody was bleary-eyed, drove it home. But yeah, I mean, they definitely to the city's credit, and they ended up getting a better deal because everybody had a little something they wanted to make it happen, to really make it a better deal for the taxpayers of Austin.
Yeah.
And they basically got it all.
Yeah, they did. And I think that's what you had to really, I think, listen closely to some of the language that some of those council members were using, where they were being firm with their language. But I don't know, at the end of the day, I think they were going to find a way, whether between, the folks at PS, Precourt Sports Ventures at the time, Richard Settle, Dave Greeley, and the whole bunch, like, they needed to get it done. And the city ultimately wanted it, or like the majority of the council ultimately wanted it to happen. Now, there were certain things that they wanted to see and they needed to see in the deal, but it just, you kind of got the feeling that there was, at the end of the day, there was going to be those 6 votes, and there ended up being 7. So
yeah, I appreciated those specific council members there were certain council members who were most definitely acting in bad faith with some of the things they were suggesting and essentially trying to slow the process down. There were others who knew that the city of Austin had leverage in the deal and worked in things that in the end, I think made this a really good deal for the city. And so I really appreciate, you mentioned Greg Kassar. There's several others who had things they brought to the table that ended up making
Delia Garza was, I think, a big one, and that's what I was trying to remember. But there was a lot of some of the transportation stuff that ended up being part of it that might ultimately lead to that rail station, and that was sort of her last push. And there's several others. I mean, Jimmy Flanagan was very vocal toward the end, and I appreciated his candor and his voice, helping me kind of navigate things at that point, where but every city council acts in a different way. And it was really enlightening to me to watch that process play out. But I think you're right, Landon. Like, I think as much as soccer fans maybe hated it in the moment, like, I think a lot of people in Austin are quicker to latch onto this team because of the way that some of that stuff ended up going down at the last minute. So I think it ultimately played out the best way that it could have, or as close as possible, at least.
Yeah. So we kind of running out of time here, but the last little segment that I wanted to touch upon was so let's look at the timeline here. I have a little diagram laid out for myself so I could keep everything straight, but that was August 15th when City Council approved the stadium lease agreement. Within October 12th is when rumors of the crew being sold to local owners started happening. So it seems like there was like a month and a half or 2 months there where it felt like the crew is dead. And
and that was the hard part to gauge. And if you, did you want to ask me a specific?
No. I was going to say, like, just kind of.
So
there really was a moment there where that's what it felt like. And after a while, there was enough talk and enough rumors of other stuff going to happen. But there was a stretch there for a while where, like, it felt like that, like it was over.
Yeah, and it was certainly a possibility. But I think I was really hesitant at that point. What was it, August 15th, you said, when that final vote happened? I think that's the date. And I remember the language that Richard Settle had been using for the last couple council meetings was, he was no longer talking about the Columbus Crew, and he was no longer really talking about 2019 or rushing the timeline as much as he had been. And there was sort of a sense that I was starting to get that, okay, maybe this isn't the Columbus Crew that we're talking about. Maybe there's something larger, and there was no way to really know, right? There was no way to know, but there was a little moment with Anthony Precourt where he was standing in front of the media, and that was the question that I don't remember if I asked, or might have been Jim Vertuno that got it out before I could. But we were asking about what would say to fans in Columbus. I think that's what Jim asked very pointedly, and he didn't really say anything. But I don't know. I can't really explain it, but everything that I got.
There was little cues and hints that you started to see that made you think that maybe that.
It made me think that it wasn't
going to be the case anymore.
Yeah, it made me think it wasn't dead. Like it wasn't like this vote had decided the fate of the crew, and that kind of also was I was taking cues right from all the people that I was able to kind of talk to in Columbus and see their thoughts on social media, and they weren't overly. There were certainly some that were just completely devastated by the city council vote, but there was also a feeling that, okay, this isn't really what's going to decide it. We need to find local owners, and that's ultimately what ended up happening. But I mean, there's certainly moments when the deal could have fallen through with the Haslams in that intervening time. But I think that I just didn't think that the August 15th vote was the nail in the coffin for the crew, and call that. I had to hesitate to say optimism on my part, but I kind of said earlier what my feelings were on the whole thing. Like, I didn't think that the crew was going to die on the city council vote, which is what made the trip by Leslie Poole, which I think is something that you wanted to maybe, I don't have much to say on that, but the trip that she made to Columbus really wasn't very fruitful at the end, because it wasn't like she was deciding on their fate. She was just deciding on whether her city was going to get a soccer team. And sure, she was led at certain points to believe that it was the crew, and we were all led to believe that it was going to be the crew, but it didn't ultimately end up being nobody in Austin decided what was going to happen with the Columbus crew. It was everybody in New York at the MLS offices and everybody in Columbus that pushed and screamed and made it difficult for them, and everybody league wide. But it was nobody in Austin that decided whether the crew was going to exist or not. It was all about the support that existed or didn't exist for a professional soccer team in Columbus, Ohio. That was always the what was going to decide whether there was a team in Columbus.
Yeah, people I talked to on Twitter, like I've met over the last couple of years, who they want to be angry at people in Austin, or they want to be angry at Anthony Precourt or whatever, and like there are reasons for all. Like, I mean, I think least of all people in Austin, because like you said, we were told we want to give you a soccer team. This is what needs to happen. It's like, okay, we'll do that. Anthony Precourt, I think that you stepped that up a little bit more. Like, he was more involved in that move. But I think if you want to be mad at anybody, be mad at Major League Soccer, because they facilitated this whole thing.
Yeah, and I mean, that goes back to, I did want to mention, and maybe, I don't know if you want to, there were a couple stories, if you want to get into the Austin side and the minutia, that I wrote back early last year, I think around March, that kind of, there's a lot of kind of behind the scenes with some of the open records requests things that I was able to find out. But one of those, like you said, like MLS was literally the day after they announced the expansion list, and Austin wasn't on it. They met with the mayor, like Don Garber and Mark Abbott, and I think some other folks from the league office met with Mayor Adler. Like, Austin wasn't on the expansion list. Like, the league was totally pushing for this to happen at certain points. And then at the very end, like, it was very obvious that the league was, okay, Anthony, like, you guys get the stadium deal done in Austin, and you're free to move to Austin, but it's on you at this point. Like, they weren't openly, maneuvering for Precourt at that point toward the end. Like, that's, to me, like, the wind had shifted, and the wind was now, it was like that whole parallel pass thing that was seemingly BS at the beginning, like it's kind of what was happening toward the end. It was like, okay, we got to figure out how to get a stadium done in like 2 months on the other end. Meanwhile, Precourt's got to figure out how to get the stadium deal done in Austin. We could talk about the differences between Columbus and Austin city politics, but they both got done. So like, credit to the folks, I guess, on both ends. But like, MLS really wasn't. They weren't in Mayor Adler's office in 2019, at least not that I know of, or in 2018, but they certainly were in 2016? 2016, yeah, early 2016. So, I mean, yeah, like MLS was totally in on it.
Yeah. So, before we wrap up, I think one other thing that I wanted to get to is kind of the current state of things. Austin FC seems to be in a really good position right now to start the next season on time. There's an announcement a few weeks ago about all of the other expansion teams that got moved back a year. Austin FC could have been that. I mean, Charlotte, who's set to come in the same year as us, got moved back a year, but just because of how far along Austin FC is, it seems like the league agrees that it's in really good shape right now. Columbus Crew is going to be building a brand new stadium, or currently building a brand new stadium that they'll move into at some point next year, most likely. And at least this season have a really good team, and seems like they're in a good situation on the field as well. So what do you think the future of this looks like? Do you think there will be a long lasting rivalry between Austin and Columbus?
That's an interesting one. I think it's Columbus's rivalry, right? And that's, there's going to be folks in Austin that are going to enjoy that aspect of Austin FC existing and are going to enjoy that rivalry too. But it's really Columbus's rivalry. And I don't think you can really take that away from them. Like, they saved their team, and Austin's, kind of the symbol that they can point to that is what almost ended it. And that's just what it is. Like, so I think that rivalry will exist in one form or another. Whether it's a big deal 5 or 10 years down the road depends on what happens on the field. Like, I was watching the MLS's back tournament and watching Columbus Crew just romp through the group stages. And I was like, man, like this team's good, and they're going to be good probably next year. And Austin is going to be on the field next year, and they're probably going to play Columbus at some point. How cool would it be if at some point Columbus keeps on this trajectory and Austin, is the force that we think that they could be? And what would it be like to see an MLS Cup either in Columbus or in Austin between? And these are the things that I just kind of dream up in my head, but like everything that's happened the last few years, crap, like that's not that crazy. But like, how crazy would that atmosphere be if you had an MLS Cup between Austin and Columbus in Columbus, and Anthony Precourt sitting in the owner's box? And, like that's a real life thing that could happen at some point, and that would really ramp the rivalry up. But like, if they only meet once every 2 years and the games are kind of crap and nobody really cares outside of Columbus about it, then maybe it dies off in the next few years. But I think it just kind of depends what happens on the field, and that's the beauty. We get to talk about soccer, and we get to talk about actual games. So that's the beauty of where we're at right now. Is like we started this off talking about Cecilio Dominguez. Like, thank God we're talking about soccer. This will be the last conversation I have about Columbus and city politics in a while and for a while, I hope. So, yeah. Anyway.
Well, I was imagining like the away supporters safety instructions for that imaginary MLS Cup match between Columbus and Austin. I imagine it would be pretty exciting.
It would be intense, that's for sure. I mean, I remember the atmosphere surrounding MLS Cup 2015 in Columbus, and I mean, you want to say like there's no support for soccer in Columbus. Like, there's all kinds of reasons why that hasn't been the case. But man, people showed up that day, and so like MLS Cup in that brand new stadium against Austin FC. Man, I want to be there for that if that happens. That would be insane.
Yes, absolutely. All right. I think we can wrap it up there. We talked about, this is an extremely complex story, and there's a lot of stuff we didn't even scratch the surface of. I think when we were talking to planning this all, Chris said that we could do a whole series on this, like essentially started an entire podcast just talking about all of this. But yeah, I'd rather just keep going forward and talk about soccer in the next 6 months to a year. So
I agree.
All right. Well, thanks so much for joining us, Chris. This was great.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, and yeah, keep up the good work, and look forward to seeing you guys soon, hopefully, and once we get past everything, and hopefully are able to either enjoy a beer or pass each other in the stadium, and that's really what I'm looking forward to, and seeing the soccer culture in this city grow, because we all know what it is already and what it can be, because it's gonna be quite cool, and it's gonna be like, honestly, that's Austin's gonna show the world, I think, at some point, whether it's next year or the year after, that this is a soccer city, and no matter how you feel about the Anthony Precourt and the Columbus saga and everything that happened in 2017 through 2018 and 19, like, Austin FC is coming, and it's about soccer in Austin. It's not about Columbus Crew, and it's not about Anthony Precourt. It's about a new force to be reckoned with in American soccer, and I truly believe that. I've seen it and witnessed it the last 4 years since I moved here, and I'm so happy to be kind of part of the soccer community here, and that's what I'm proud of. I think from that this all of that crap led to now I'm talking to you guys and still able to kind of put a smile on my face and think about the game that I love. So I mean, that's what it's all about. So, and I'm talking too long again. I'm just gonna shut up and get off your podcast now.
Before we finish, where can people find your work, Chris?
Yeah, so follow me at Chris Bils on Twitter, and right now you can find my work in the Austin American Statesman, and leave it there for now. Like we'll see what the next year brings.
All right.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.
When no one is around.